Think back to someone who made you feel special at first. They seemed to understand you better than anyone else ever had. Their attention felt like sunlight, warm, rare, and completely focused on you. But something shifted, slowly and quietly. You started second-guessing yourself in ways you never had before. Small comments left you unsettled. You found yourself apologizing for things that weren't your fault. You felt responsible for their moods, their problems, their comfort, and somehow never responsible enough. The people around you noticed changes. You were more careful with your words. You were more anxious in situations that used to feel easy. You stopped trusting your own instincts, because every time you did, something made you feel foolish for it. You might have blamed yourself. You might have thought the relationship was simply difficult, or that you needed to try harder. But what if the problem wasn't your effort at all? What if the person in your life carried a particular pattern of traits, a psychological profile studied by researchers for decades, that made genuine connection almost impossible from the very beginning? This isn't about labeling people carelessly. It isn't about reducing complex human beings to simple categories. It is about giving you the knowledge to recognize specific patterns that cause real and measurable harm, so that you can protect yourself with clarity rather than confusion. What you are about to learn could change how you see some of your most important relationships. Psychologists use the term dark triad to describe a cluster of 3 distinct personality traits that appear together with striking regularity. Those 3 traits are narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Each one is damaging on its own. Together, they form a psychological profile that researchers have consistently linked to manipulation, exploitation, and emotional harm in close relationships. The concept was formally introduced by Delroy Paulhuss and Kevin Williams at the University of British Columbia in 2002. Their landmark research identified that these 3 traits, while technically separate, overlap in meaningful ways. They share a core of callousness, a willingness to use others, and a striking absence of genuine emotional empathy. Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman of Columbia University later expanded on this research, noting that dark triad individuals often present as highly charismatic and socially skilled. They are frequently described as charming, confident, and even inspiring, at least in the beginning. This is what makes them so difficult to identify. You are not naive if you miss the signs. You are human. These individuals are often extraordinarily skilled at managing impressions. They know how to become exactly what you need, for exactly long enough to gain your trust. But their patterns do leave traces, behavioral fingerprints that, once you know how to read them, become recognizable, and that recognition is your most powerful tool. Here are the 7 signs. Sign 1. They charm you before they know you. You meet someone, and within minutes, you feel a remarkable connection. They seem to understand your humor, your values, your struggles, as if they have known you for years. The conversation flows effortlessly. They say exactly the right things at exactly the right moments. You leave the interaction feeling seen in a way that is almost surprising. That feeling is not accidental. In clinical psychology, this behavior is called impression management, a deliberate and conscious process of controlling how others perceive you. For most people, impression management is a normal social skill. We all present our best selves in new situations, but for individuals who score high on dark triad traits, impression management operates differently. It is not about nervousness or social grace. It is a calculated tool used to establish trust and influence quickly. Research, published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences by Dr. Jonassen and colleagues at the University of South Alabama, found that dark triad individuals score significantly higher on short-term mating strategies and social boldness. They are skilled at reading what others want and reflecting it back convincingly. Dr. Robert Hare, a criminal psychologist at the University of British Columbia and one of the world's foremost experts on psychopathy, describes this charm as superficial gloss. It is smooth, it is immediate, and it does not deepen over time the way genuine connection does. In real life, this looks like a new coworker who knows your life story within a week. It looks like a romantic partner who says, "I feel like I've known you forever" on a second date. It looks like a new friend who seems to anticipate your needs before you voice them. The dialogue sounds like this: "You're honestly the most interesting person I've met in years." Or, "I don't usually open up this fast, but there's something different about you." These statements create intimacy quickly and anchor you emotionally before any real trust has been earned. Consider the experience of a woman named Sarah, not her real name, who described meeting a new colleague at a marketing firm. Within 2 weeks, he knew the names of her siblings, her childhood city, her career frustrations, and her relationship history. He remembered every detail she mentioned. He asked follow-up questions. He seemed genuinely invested. 6 months later, Sarah discovered he had used that information strategically in team meetings, in private conversations with management, and in subtle ways that positioned her as unreliable while positioning himself as indispensable. "I thought he was my friend," she said. "I didn't realize I was being studied." The reason this sign is so easy to miss is rooted in how the human brain processes social warmth. When someone pays close attention to us, our brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding neurochemical associated with deep friendship and love. We are neurologically wired to interpret intense attention as genuine care. Dark triad individuals exploit this wiring with precision. Your protection strategy begins with slowing down. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist and professor at California State University, recommends what she calls pacing intimacy. Allow trust to develop over time. Notice whether the warmth someone offers you deepens as they actually get to know you, or whether it stays at the same elevated level from day one. Never calculated charm plateaus. Sign 2. Empathy is missing beneath the surface. There is a moment in many relationships with dark triad individuals when something feels wrong but you cannot name it. You share something painful, and their response feels slightly off. Not cruel, necessarily, just hollow, like words being spoken from a script rather than from genuine feeling. You tell yourself you imagined it. Empathy, in psychological terms, exists along 2 dimensions. Cognitive empathy is the ability to understand what someone else is feeling to intellectually grasp their perspective. Affective empathy is the ability to feel something in response to be genuinely moved by another person's emotional state. Most healthy individuals experience both. Dark triad personalities, particularly those high in psychopathy and narcissism, show a consistent pattern in research. They often retain cognitive empathy while showing significant deficits in affective empathy. This distinction is critical. It means they can understand your pain. They simply do not feel it. Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University, whose research on empathy has shaped much of the field, describes individuals with low affective empathy as operating with an empathy erosion. His work suggests this is not simply a choice, but a deeply embedded feature of how their psychological system processes other people's suffering. Research by Dr. Aaron Buckles at the University of British Columbia further found that dark triad individuals show increased pleasure in response to others' discomfort in certain contexts, a finding that underlines how fundamentally different their emotional processing can be. In day-to-day life, this looks quieter than you might expect. It looks like a partner who responds to your tears with a change of subject. It looks like a friend who listens to your crisis and immediately redirects to their own problems. It looks like a manager who acknowledges that you are overwhelmed and then assigns you more work anyway. The dialogue sounds like this: "I'm sure it's not that bad," or "You're being too sensitive." Or, most subtly, "I understand. I really do," followed immediately by behavior that demonstrates they do not. A man named David, again, not his real name, described a 3-year friendship with someone he considered his closest confidant. Every time David went through a difficult period, his friend would listen attentively, offer what seemed like thoughtful advice, and then within days use the details of David's vulnerability in social settings. Not cruelly enough to be obvious, just enough to establish himself as someone with inside knowledge, and David as someone who struggled. He never seemed to enjoy it, David said. That's what was so confusing. There was no visible satisfaction. It was more like he just didn't register that it was wrong. This sign is difficult to detect because dark triad individuals have often learned to perform empathy with reasonable accuracy. They know the correct words. They mirror the appropriate facial expressions. What is missing is the emotional undertone, that felt sense of being truly understood rather than simply processed. Pay attention to how you feel after sharing something vulnerable. Dr. Brené Brown, research professor at the University of Houston, writes that genuine empathy creates a sense of connection, the feeling of being less alone. If you consistently feel more alone after sharing with someone, that emotional data is worth examining carefully. Sign 3. Their honesty is selective and strategic. You catch a small inconsistency. It is minor, easily explained. You let it go. Then you catch another, and another. And each time, there is an explanation that almost makes sense, delivered with such calm certainty that questioning it feels unreasonable. Pathological lying in the context of dark triad personalities is not simply about hiding the truth. It is a sophisticated system of narrative management, designed to keep you off balance while maintaining the relationship dynamic they prefer. Dr. Drew Curtis at Angelo State University, who has researched deception specifically in Machiavellian individuals, describes their lying behavior as fundamentally instrumental. They do not lie out of shame or fear, the way many people do. They lie because lying is the most efficient tool available to achieve a desired outcome. Research published in the British Journal of Social Psychology found that Machiavellian individuals show significantly higher scores on measures of strategic deception, meaning their lies are not impulsive but calculated, timed, and targeted. In everyday life, this manifests in layers. There are outright falsehood statements that are simply untrue. There are omissions, critical pieces of information withheld, because their inclusion would change your behavior. And there is what psychologists call gaslighting, the deliberate distortion of your perception of events that actually happened. The dialogue sounds like this: "That's not what I said," or "You always do this, you twist everything," or "I never promised that, you misunderstood." These statements are delivered with confidence, and over time, they erode your trust in your own memory. Consider the story of a woman named Elena. She was in a 2-year romantic relationship with a man she described as deeply confident and persuasive. When she would recall conversations that contradicted his current claims, he would express concern, not anger. He would say, quietly, that she seemed to be misremembering a lot lately, that she had done this before, that perhaps she was under too much stress. Elena began to genuinely doubt her own perception. She started keeping notes, and when she reviewed them, the pattern became undeniable. The distortions were consistent, deliberate, and always worked in his favor. The reason victims miss this sign is connected to a cognitive phenomenon called the truth bias. Research by Dr. Timothy Levine at the University of Alabama at Birmingham shows that human beings default to assuming the people they interact with are being honest. This is not a flaw. It is the foundation of functional social life. Dark triad individuals exploit this default assumption relentlessly. Your protection strategy is documentation, not as paranoia, but as clarity. Keep a simple private record of significant conversations and commitments. not to catch someone in a lie, but to give yourself a reliable external reference point for your own memory. If someone consistently contradicts your documented recollections, that is meaningful information. Trust the data over the performance. Sign 4. They treat relationships as transactions. You begin to notice a pattern. Something is always being exchanged. When they help you, something is expected in return, and when it isn't given, the help is revisited. Favors become debts. Kindness becomes leverage. The relationship begins to feel less like a connection and more like a negotiation you didn't know you were in. Machiavellianism. The third trait of the dark triad is defined by a worldview in which human relationships are fundamentally instrumental. Other people are assets to be managed, not individuals to be genuinely connected with. Dr. Richard Christie of Columbia University, who first developed the Mach 4 scale to measure Machiavellian traits, described high scorers as individuals who operate with a consistent belief that humans are motivated primarily by self-interest, and that the most intelligent strategy is to exploit that self-interest before others exploit yours. Research by Dr. Jonason and colleagues at the University of South Alabama found that dark triad individuals prioritize short-term gains in social exchanges, even when long-term relationship costs are significant. They are not investing in connection. They are managing assets. In daily life, this looks like a friend who offers help but catalogs every favor with precision. It looks like a partner who reminds you frequently of what they have done for you, particularly during conflict. It looks like a colleague who volunteers support and then calls in that support at a moment maximally inconvenient for you. The dialogue sounds like this: "After everything I've done for you," or "I thought we were close. I guess I was wrong." Or the more subtle version, "I don't ask for much, do I?" A statement designed to make you feel that you are perpetually in debt while their demands remain undefined. A man named James described a business partnership that began as a genuine friendship. His partner was generous in the early months, sharing contacts, covering small expenses, offering time and advice. James felt grateful, and his partner made sure that gratitude was present in every difficult conversation. Every negotiation returned to what had been given. Every disagreement was framed as ingratitude. "I felt like I could never catch up," James said. "Like no matter what I gave, the ledger was always in his favor." This sign is difficult to see from the inside because the early generosity is real. The help is actually given. The time is actually offered. It is only the intent that differs, and intent is invisible until the debt is called in. Dr. Harriet Lerner, clinical psychologist and author of The Dance of Anger, notes that healthy relationships involve what she calls mutual generosity without scorekeeping. When you begin to feel that your relationship operates like a balance sheet, that felt sense is worth taking seriously. Your protection strategy is to notice your emotional state after interactions. Do you feel grateful in a warm, easy way, or do you feel indebted in a way that creates anxiety? Gratitude and indebtedness feel different in the body. Learning to distinguish them is a form of self-awareness that can protect your most important relationships. Sign 5. Their emotional reactions feel designed to control you. You learn, gradually and without realizing it, to manage their moods. You make choices based on how they will react. You avoid topics. You time conversations. You anticipate their emotional state with a precision that begins to feel like a second job, and you never quite feel safe enough to stop. Dark triad individuals, particularly those high in narcissism and psychopathy, often use emotional volatility as a regulatory mechanism, not simply because they are unstable, but because unpredictability is an extraordinarily effective tool for maintaining control. Dr. Lundy Bancroft, author and researcher who has worked extensively with abusive relationship dynamics, describes this pattern as intermittent reinforcement. Unpredictable emotional responses alternating between warmth and coldness, approval and withdrawal, create a state of chronic, low-level anxiety in those close to the individual. That anxiety, over time, becomes organizing. You structure your behavior around reducing it. Research in behavioral psychology consistently shows that intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful reinforcement schedule known. It is the same mechanism that drives gambling behavior. When reward is unpredictable, the drive to seek it intensifies dramatically. In everyday life, this looks like a partner whose moods shift with no apparent cause. It looks like a manager who praises you one week and is visibly disappointed the next with no clear change in your performance. It looks like a friend whose warmth feels conditional, always slightly out of reach. The dialogue surrounding these swings sounds like this: "I just don't know what I did wrong," or "Things were so good yesterday, what happened?" Or the self-directed version: "Maybe I'm just too sensitive." A woman named Priya described a 5-year relationship with a partner whose emotional range felt like weather, unpredictable, powerful, and impossible to prepare for. She became extraordinarily skilled at reading his smallest signals. A particular silence, the way he set down a glass, the pace of his typing. She reorganized her own responses, her own schedule, her own sense of self, all in service of reducing the probability of a storm. "I thought I was just trying to be a good partner," she said. "I didn't realize I had stopped being a person and started being a management system." The reason this sign is so difficult to identify is that the resulting anxiety feels self-generated. You are not aware of being controlled. You are aware of being anxious, and your brain, seeking an explanation, tends to locate the problem in yourself. Dr. Judith Herman, psychiatrist and author of Trauma and Recovery, writes that one of the central effects of ongoing psychological manipulation is what she calls captivity of the mind, a state in which the person being harmed becomes organized around the needs and moods of the person causing harm, losing access to their own internal compass. Your protection strategy begins with reclaiming your own emotional baseline. Dr. Peter Levine, a researcher in trauma physiology, recommends body-based awareness practices, noticing where in your body you carry tension and when. If you consistently feel a particular kind of anxiety before or after interactions with a specific person, that physiological response is information. Your nervous system often knows what your conscious mind hasn't yet named. Sign 6. They genuinely believe they are exceptional and act on it. There is a difference between confidence and grandiosity. Confidence says, "I am capable." Grandiosity says, "I am different from ordinary people." Dark triad individuals, high in narcissism, often carry a deeply held sense of their own exceptionalism, a belief not simply that they are talented or successful, but that normal rules, normal standards, and normal considerations do not apply to them in the same way they apply to others. Dr. Jean Twenge of San Diego State University, who has tracked narcissism trends across generations in her research, describes pathological narcissism as characterized by what she calls entitlement, the consistent expectation that one deserves more, receives less, and is surrounded by people who fail to recognize their true worth. Research by Dr. W. Keith Campbell at the University of Georgia found that individuals who score high on narcissistic personality traits consistently overestimate their own performance, underestimate their failures, and attribute their successes to inherent superiority rather than circumstance or effort. In daily life, this looks like someone who requires a disproportionate amount of admiration in group settings. It looks like a person who responds to being treated like everyone else with visible frustration, as if equality itself is an insult. It looks like someone who dismisses the achievements of others as luck, poor competition, or circumstances, while describing their own achievements as evidence of unique ability. The dialogue sounds like this: Most people don't think at this level. Or, I've always been different. People have told me my whole life. Or, more subtly, the ongoing, quiet assumption that their time, attention, and presence are worth more than yours. A man named Marcus described a 10-year friendship with someone he had admired since college for their brilliance and vision. Over time, he noticed that the friendship had an invisible structure. Marcus's role was to appreciate. His friend's role was to be appreciated. When Marcus accomplished something significant, his friend found ways gentle, articulate ways to contextualize it as smaller than it appeared. When his friend accomplished something significant, the expectation of Marcus's celebration was complete and immediate. I realized one day that I had spent a decade being someone's audience, Marcus said, and I didn't know when I had agreed to that role. This sign is easy to miss because grandiosity in dark triad individuals is often sophisticated and embedded in genuine capability. Many of these individuals are, in fact, talented. Their exceptionalism is not entirely invented. What is distorted is the belief that their talent exempts them from the obligations that govern everyone else, obligations like honesty, consideration, and accountability. Dr. Craig Malkin, clinical psychologist and lecturer at Harvard Medical School, writes in his research on narcissism that the core wound beneath grandiosity is often a fragile sense of self, one that requires constant external reinforcement to remain stable. Understanding this does not excuse the behavior, but it does explain why the grandiosity is so persistent and so resistant to challenge. Your protection strategy is to pay attention to reciprocity in the relationship over time. Genuine confidence in another person tends to create space for others to shine. Grandiosity, by contrast, requires the room to contract. If you consistently find yourself minimizing your own experiences, accomplishments, or needs in order to preserve someone else's sense of superiority, that pattern deserves your full attention. Sign 7. Accountability is always someone else's responsibility. Something goes wrong. You wait, perhaps with some anxiety, to see how they will respond. And then, subtly, articulately, sometimes even warmly, the responsibility shifts. Not to them, to circumstances, to other people, to you. The conversation ends with you apologizing for something you didn't do, or explaining yourself for something that wasn't your fault. The avoidance of personal accountability is one of the most consistent behavioral markers of dark triad individuals and one of the most psychologically sophisticated. Dr. Roy Baumeister of the University of Queensland, whose research on self-regulation and moral behavior has been widely cited, describes what he calls moral disengagement in individuals who consistently avoid accountability. These individuals do not experience their behavior as requiring justification. Their internal narrative is constructed in a way that always positions them as reasonable, as provoked, or as misunderstood. Research by Dr. Paul Huss and colleagues found that dark triad individuals score significantly higher on external attribution tendencies, meaning they consistently locate the cause of negative outcomes outside themselves, in other people or circumstances. This is not simply defensiveness, it is a stable cognitive orientation. In everyday life, this looks like a partner who, when caught in a lie, redirects immediately to your behavior. Why you pushed them to lie, why you created an environment where honesty felt unsafe. It looks like a manager who, when a project fails, identifies clearly what each team member contributed to the failure and never includes themselves. It looks like a friend who, when they hurt you, expresses sorrow for your pain in a way that never quite reaches an acknowledgement of having caused it. The dialogue sounds like this: "If you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have reacted that way." Or, "I'm sorry you feel that way," which is not an apology but a statement about your emotional state. Or, "I'm not perfect, but look at what you did." A woman named Claire described a marriage in which she could not recall a single instance of her husband saying the words, "I was wrong," not in 11 years. When things went poorly, there was always a clear and articulate explanation for why the fault resided elsewhere. The explanations were often plausible. Individually, each one was defensible. "It was only when I listed them all together," she said, "that the pattern became impossible to explain away." This sign is among the hardest to identify because the lack of accountability is wrapped in language that sounds like introspection. These individuals often speak about growth, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence while demonstrating none of it in practice. The vocabulary of accountability is present. The behavior is absent. Dr. Harriet Lerner writes that genuine accountability requires 3 elements: a clear acknowledgement of the harmful behavior, an expression of understanding about how that behavior affected the other person, and a commitment to changed behavior going forward. When you examine interactions with someone you suspect may be a dark triad individual, ask yourself, do their apologies contain all 3 elements? Or do they contain only the performance of one? Your protection strategy is to observe behavior over time, not language in the moment. Words are easy to produce and difficult to evaluate in real time. Behavior, across many months, in many circumstances, tells a far more reliable story. Dr. Maya Angelou's observation, often cited in psychological contexts, remains one of the most accurate guides available. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You have just learned 7 consistent behavioral patterns that researchers have identified in individuals who carry dark triad traits. These patterns are not random. They are interconnected, mutually reinforcing, and once you can name them, recognizable. The most important thing to understand is this: recognizing these signs is not about becoming suspicious of everyone in your life. It is about developing the psychological literacy to protect yourself when the evidence genuinely warrants it. Awareness is not cynicism. It is clarity. And clarity, in the context of relationships, is one of the most powerful forms of self-care available to you. You deserve relationships in which trust is genuine, care is mutual, and accountability is real. Knowing what the absence of those things looks like is the first step toward insisting on their presence. If this video brought something into focus for you, share your experience in the comments. Your insight might help someone else name something they have been struggling to understand. Subscribe to continue learning, and consider watching the next video on how to safely exit a relationship with a dark triad individual. You already took the most important step. You chose to look clearly.